Thank you, Judy. Thanks for sharing about the basic details, and good evening, good morning from wherever the parts of you're joining our members. And myself, Mohit Sharma, currently chairing the IIRSM India branch. And I again welcome you all to our today's webinar. And definitely, you would be having some great insightful during the entire session. So before to start and to hand over the mic to our speaker, I would just like to share that IIRSM India branch, we have reached 923 followers in our LinkedIn page, and that's a great achievement, I would say. Over the few months, with all your support, we have grown this, and definitely in future, in coming year, for this year, this would be our last webinar, and in coming year, again, would be keep on engaging with varieties of webinar, and definitely would be having a great session there. And for today's webinar, I would like to welcome and thanks Mr. Grant for taking out time and going to share some valuable experiences, lessons, and to give a few quick information about Grant. Then he is a very inspiring and motivating leader in the field of risk management, sales, safety, and he has a very long visions, and his charismatic is like worth to checking out. So with this, I would like hand over to our speaker, Mr. Grant, and let's go ahead with the webinars. So over to you, Grant. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mohit, and thank you all for the opportunity to join today's webinar. Just so you know, these next set of slides, I've got around 30 slides to present. I'll be talking at you for around 25 minutes. And it is the set of slides that I recently shared at the 4th Occupational Safety and Health Arab Conference in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia 2 months ago now. And I also shared these slides at the Bahrain branch meeting a couple of weeks ago. So I do hope you find it useful, and there'll be opportunities for questions at the end.
Grant, we don't seem to be able to hear you.
You'll hear me, Julie?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay, so we will start with a bit of an introduction to myself, talk about some definitions, then talk about the business case for safety culture, jump into the different approaches, whether they're qualitative or quantitative, and finally finish with a best practice, which is the HSE-Safety climate tool. In terms of an introduction, I'm the global EHS lead for Watson Marlow Fluid Technology Solutions, part of the Spirax-Sarco engineering company. And we manufacture peristaltic pumps and flexible hoses for a variety of different industries, from mining to food to pharmaceutical. And we also operate in 40 different countries. I was fortunate enough to visit India for the first time, Pune, to conduct an audit. A wonderful experience. My academic background is in environmental studies. I study at the University of Nottingham. I have a bachelor's degree and master's degree. And I'm also a fellow member of IIRSM, a chartered member of IOSH, and a practitioner member of IEMA. And I've been quite closely involved with IIRSM over recent years. Written a number of publications on engagement, risk roadmaps, and also mentoring, something that's quite close to my heart. I've been fortunate enough to be on the judging panel of the IIRSM Risk Excellence Awards. So I've seen best practices from across the globe, including quite a few from this region of the world. And I'm also a founder member of the IIRSM Emerging Risk Leaders Networks. This was a network set up to support the new generation of risk professionals. And it's great to see more and more people joining again from this region. And if you do want to find out more information on that, please do feel free to reach out to either myself, Mohit, or Julie. So we'll then move to a case study, first case study, Chernobyl, Ukraine, 1986. This was one of the worst industrial disasters in history. Let's just remind ourselves what happened here. So it was a routine test that went wrong. There were 2 explosions in one of the reactors that released 400 times more radiation than the Hiroshima atomic bomb in 1945. There were over 50 immediate deaths and over 7,000 longer-term radiation-induced illnesses. And the full impact is still being felt today, with many exclusion zones still in place. And safety culture as a concept was first termed following Chernobyl by the International Nuclear Safety Group, the INSG. This was in 1988, a few years after the incident, in their post-accident review report. So I won't read out the full definition, but here they refer to characteristics and attitudes in organizations and individuals. Now, the definition has been somewhat refined since then, and one of the most well-recognized definitions today actually comes from the UK Health and Safety Executive, and this was put together in 1993, and it's the product of individual and group values, attitudes, perceptions, competencies, and patterns of behavior that determine the commitment to and the style and proficiency of an organization's health and safety management. And this can be split into the psychological aspects, so how people feel, the behavioral aspects, what people do, and also those situational aspects, what the organization has in place. That might be the policies, procedures, that type of thing. Now, to simplify it even further, I approached 3 leaders in our profession and asked them to tell me what culture means to them in one sentence. One of them said culture is what people do when no one is looking. Another said culture is the way we do things around here. And the last said culture is how something is done rather than how it should be done. And that individual also provided this illustration on the right-hand side. You see the policy and procedure manual on the left-hand side in green, and then the yellow booklet, if you will, how we actually do things around here. So I hope that sums up and defines safety culture. This diagram was put together by James Reason in the 1990s, who was an expert in human error and safety culture, and he studied the subject in detail. And it shows how safety culture is underpinned by many other subcultures, and also illustrates just how complex safety culture can be. So if we start at the bottom, the organizational culture. So this is the DNA of our businesses. It's where we have the buy-in, the commitment, it's where vision sits, it's where policies sit. We then have a just culture. It's the idea of an open, honest, and transparent business with zero blame. The next is a reporting culture. That idea of a don't walk by culture, where our workforce are actively encouraged to report safety issues and not punished. Learning, so learn from failures and share them, but also equally important, recognize successes, celebrate those. And flexible culture, so having the flexibility and adaptability to deal with change. So COVID-19, for example, that tested the flexibility of many businesses. Some bounced back and others unfortunately went under and are no longer trading. And lastly is an informed culture. So people being informed of different factors affecting safety in the business. Okay. So the next case study here that I've used is actually Bhopal in India in 1984. So this was another major industrial disaster in our history. And it was an insecticide factory owned by the Union Carbide Corporation, a daughter company of Dow Chemical Company. So let's remind ourselves what happened. It was a toxic gas leak that killed up to 8,000 individuals, either from immediate or longer term impacts. And it was caused by the introduction of water into a chemical tank, which resulted in an exothermic reaction, which released the toxic gas cloud. If we stick with James Reason's model, we can break this down and look at the safety culture in a bit more detail. So if we start with organizational culture, safety was not a priority within this particular company. It was underinvested. There was numerous safety features turned off, and there was also insufficient maintenance of a lot of the equipment. From a just culture perspective, the Union Carbide Corporation evaded blame. They claimed it was down to employee sabotage. From a reporting culture aspect, numerous workers did raise concerns, whether it be through their safety committees or directly to management. However, these were ignored. Learning culture, this one was quite interesting. So in terms of audits, within the Union Carbide Corporation, the audits were done every year if you were based in Europe or in America. However, everywhere else, they were done every 3 years. And the last audit that was done at Bhopal was in 1982, which was 2 years prior to the incident, where 60 findings were flagged. 30 of those were major findings. And interestingly as well, there were similar incidents of runaway reactions reported in other factories within Union Carbide Corporation. However, these were never shared across the business. And lastly, flexible culture. There was a lack of emergency drills at the facility, and there was also a lack of public education and awareness. So when these individuals were arriving at hospital, medical staff struggled to know what they were dealing with and how to deal with it accordingly. So this just highlights using James Reason's cultural model in a bit more detail. Now, when safety culture as a concept first emerged, it did receive some bad press. A few headlines here: Mission Impossible, Culture's Confusions, and the Philosopher's Stone, and the Harry Potter reference there. And this was because it was difficult to measure culture in a standardized way. But we now have tools that we can use to measure, which is why it's much more established and respected. So why is it important? So it tells us where we are and where we need to focus our efforts. Culture drives behavior, which in turn drives performance. That might be, from a lagging perspective, changes in the frequency rate, or from a leading perspective, near misses, action closure rates. We know that a strong safety culture reduces accidents, near misses, and loss events. And it also improves productivity and efficiency. So there was a study completed by IIRSM a few years ago, which looked at 54 different businesses and found a significant positive correlation between safety culture and productivity. It improves emergency preparedness, so that comes back to those flexible and learning cultures. And it also helps to engage the workforce, so it empowers the workforce and gives them ownership of safety. And also drives sustainable business success. People want to work for a business that looks after its employees and that cares about employee well-being and safety. So from a business case, so how do we actually sell safety culture to our board members? And we can really go back to basics here with the 3 pillars of moral, financial, and legal. So in a perfect world, the moral argument wins every time. If there's more we can do to reduce accidents, we must. From a financial perspective, if we did want to put prices on injuries, the health and safety executive actually did some cost estimates, those being direct costs. They said a fatality, $145,000 US, reportable injury, $4,500 US, and work-related ill health, $5,000 US. And That's just the tip of the iceberg, as we all know. The indirect costs are around 10 times greater than that of the direct costs. It instills stakeholder confidence, so it can actually promote new business. Corporate social responsibility is a big thing nowadays for businesses. ESG has become somewhat of a buzzword these days, very popular, and also ISO accreditation is measuring safety culture, supports and follows the framework of ISO. And lastly, is targeting resources more cost effectively. So I have seen companies spend hundreds of thousands of pounds on initiatives that target the wrong thing. So safety culture really pulls out those real gaps. And lastly is legal. So although safety culture, measuring it and monitoring it is not a legal requirement, it can be investigated and could contribute significantly to prosecutions. And there's been a number of high profile cases recently where judges have taken into consideration safety culture efforts of a business. Okay, so we can now jump into how we actually measure safety culture. So I'll start with qualitative measures. We refer to these as cultural maturity models. Now, there's several different models available that can map the way that safety culture can evolve. And you can go on the internet now and find multiple different styles and types of models. I've used these many times, they do work well, and they use a high level criteria to determine the level of cultural maturity. Now, there's a couple of drawbacks. There's no numerical aspect to them, and they don't allow for benchmarking, and they're fairly limited in scope. But nevertheless, they're a great place to start for any organization looking to improve their safety culture. So we'll start with the Bradley curve. So this is the most popular of the cultural maturity models. It was developed in 1995 by DuPont, and it's comprised of 4 different stages. The first 2, which are around compliance, and the latter 2, which are around more commitment. And the idea being, as you improve culture on the x-axis, you reduce the accident rate on the y-axis. And you can see at the bottom of this page the criteria that's used. So that's made up of 6 different criteria, from attitudes to accidents, all the way down to activities and measures. So if we just have a look at one of the criteria, attitudes to accidents. So at that first stage, the reactive stage, accidents are viewed as normal. If we then move into the second stage, dependent, 0 accidents are seen as unrealistic. If we then move into the third stage, independent, 0 accidents are seen as possible. And then the fourth stage, 0 accidents is the goal. That's at the interdependent stage. And the same with responsibility. If we look at the early stages, responsibility is not or hardly ever displayed. Responsibility lies with management at that second stage. And then when we move to stage 3 and 4, we can see that responsibility, each individual takes responsibility, and then employees take responsibility for themselves and others in the group. So you can get a working group together as early as tomorrow if you wanted to, made up of senior managers, safety reps, supervisors, and shop floor staff. It's very important we have an even representation across the business. And you can decide where you sit on this Bradley curve by working through the different criteria. And you can then prepare appropriate action plans to move you up into the next stage. So that's one example. Second example is the Keil Model. This was developed for the rail industry in the early 2000s, a high-risk industry in the UK. And this time there are 5 different levels, from emerging all the way up to continually improving. And the criteria, rather than it being 6 like the Bradley curve, it's made up of 10 topics this time, which are shown up on the right-hand side. And the last one is the Hudson Ladder. So this is based on research from the Piper Alpha oil disaster. And this has 5 stages, from pathological, so who cares as long as we're not caught, all the way up to generative, which is HSE is how we do things around here. So just to re-emphasize, with all these models, you can get a working group together, you can look at your leading indicators, you can discuss each section amongst yourselves, and you can determine your level of maturity based on that criteria and prepare an action plan that will get you to the next level. I've used this approach many times. It's very useful, certainly at the start of a year when you're looking to create your strategy. So I would highly recommend this approach. Now we've looked at qualitative measures. The next is quantitative measures. So those that really want to measure safety culture with data. Now this time we refer to cultural maturity indexes rather than models. And they incorporate a formal scoring system. And they also allow for benchmarking. Now, these indexes are developed and offered as tools by third parties. They do cost money. That's the biggest difference between them and the qualitative approaches. And there's a few examples here. So the HSE, which I'll talk about, DECRA have produced one, and DOT have also produced one. But there's numerous other providers available. So what I will talk to you about is the Health and Safety Executive Safety Climate Tool. Now, this is one of the most successful and well-established and accepted tools, which was developed by the HSE in 2008. So how does it work? So it's a survey-based assessment. This can be either online, it can be a physical survey if preferred within the organization. And it's made up of 8 key factors, which is shown on the right-hand side, from organizational commitment all the way down to accident and near-miss reporting. Now, each of these 8 key factors have around 30 questions associated with them. And essentially what you are doing is you are assessing the responses of chosen groups of it might be managers, shop floor staff, field engineers, to determine attitudes and perceptions and how they differ between different levels and different groups of the organization. And what you get at the end is a comprehensive set of reports and also, more importantly, a clear action plan to help you improve safety culture within your organization. Now, it's been used by over 400 organizations globally to date. Examples include Doosan, the Olympic Authority, and Bureau Veritas. It's available in over 40 different languages, and prices range from $900 US all the way up to $32,000 US, depending on the size of the organization. So the next few slides are examples of the data output that you can expect to see. So the first one here is the summary of those 8 key factors we looked at. We can see all the way at the bottom, the different responses have been grouped into either unfavorable, neutral, or favorable. And we can see that for this particular organization, organizational commitment, not particularly good, whereas the peer group attitude is very strong. Another example here is of those 8 key factors made up of 30 questions each, we can look into each of those in more detail and break it down. So this one is factor number 4, which is the usability of procedures. Now the output can also be in graph form too. So here we have the favorable responses shown on the green bars for the 8 different key factors. And then the lines are the different groups that this particular organization has split. So we've got senior manager, supervisor, and employees. So you can quickly start to see how attitudes and perceptions are not aligned between these different groups of individuals based on those key factors. The last point here, and I think one of the most important features of the tool is the benchmarking aspect. So those 8 key factors, you can benchmark against industry averages. So there are over 400 organizations that have used the tool, and that equates to over 50,000 responses. So you can see if you fall into the bottom, middle, or top quartile compared to all the other organizations of a similar size within a similar industry to your own organization. And the last point here is the recommendations. So as I mentioned, the HSE will work with you looking at those gaps from the data that's been gathered to improve safety culture within your organization. The last case study here is the London Olympics in the UK in 2012. So this is an example of a successful implementation of the safety climate tool on a major project. So it was a large-scale construction program for the Olympics completed by the Olympic Delivery Authority. There were over 12,000 employees and there were over 80 million hours worked. So this next quote came from the head of health and safety. I think it's quite a powerful statement. So the climate surveys were invaluable to us. Too much time is spent discussing both culture and leading indicators in vague and imprecise ways. The data we obtained from each project team and across the program's workforce meant that we could take specific initiatives to develop the safety culture. The data and its analysis told us where we were going and identified opportunities for improvement. So the outcome was an accident frequency rate of 0.16 per 100,000 hours worked against an industry average in the UK for construction at that time of 3.4, so significantly under the industry average. And it was also the first time in history that there were 0 fatalities on a major sporting event construction program of this magnitude. So it just goes to show that with the right planning and focus on culture, large projects of this nature can be implemented on time and safely. So with the World Cup in North America next, the Paris Olympics coming up, I certainly hope that these tools are considered. Now, if budgets are tight or if buy-in from top management is difficult, but you have the resource and the expertise in-house, you can build your own. This is something that we did in a previous company. We used the HSE tool that I've shared with you as inspiration, and we developed our own. So we used it within our APAC region for Singapore, Malaysia, and Japan. So we firstly identified our groups that we wanted to target, and that was management, total workforce, and shop floor staff. Those are shown on the right-hand columns. We then identified our questions. So these are just a few examples of the bigger question set. And we also identified what scoring we were going to use. These are shown on the right-hand side, whether it be strong positive response, further improvement opportunity, or areas of concern. And I've highlighted just 2 findings here, specifically from the management group. So we can see here that accidents are not always reported, were flagged as an area of concern. And also supervisors sometimes turn a blind eye if people are not following safety rules. Again, an area of concern. And just something that I didn't mention earlier, with all these surveys, they're completely confidential and anonymous. And that's a reason that they are so useful. So these were 2 quite concerning findings for us, and we were able to quickly put in place targeted action plans and then review this throughout the year. We then completed the survey a year later, and we could see tangible improvements. So it was a really helpful exercise, again, to give us those targeted areas of focus. So in terms of recommendations and next steps, now this will depend completely on where you are in terms of cultural maturity within your businesses. If it's a fairly new concept, then I would suggest option 1 is just to expand your metrics, if not done so yet, to really focus on leading indicators. You know, safety concerns, active monitoring systems, training, BBS, that type of thing, enable you to start that safety culture journey. Option 2 is to determine your cultural maturity level using the Bradley curve, the Hudson Ladder, the Keil model, or any other model that is available out there. And I mentioned you could do that this afternoon, you could do that tomorrow. You just need a equal representation of your business made up of senior managers, supervisors, shop floor staff. Use the criteria and determine where your business is on that cultural maturity curve. And option 3, so for those that are already using the models, you can now move to a more quantitative approach and dig deeper and benchmark against organizations. You can utilize one of the tried and tested methods of the third parties which I've shared, or as I mentioned, if budgets are tight or buying is difficult, but you've got that resource and expertise in-house, then why not develop your own and come up with a quantitative measure of safety culture. So those are all the slides from myself. I hope that you found it useful. And are there any questions?
No questions so far. Mohit, do you have any questions for Grant?
Not any questions, but yes, safety matrices, like in all of our organization, this has people. Yeah, it plays an important role for us, and definitely about measuring and other tools and techniques. What we have seen in this webinar is worth re-emphasizing, like how we can and make more stronger our work areas. No any question as particular. Yeah.
Thank you, Mohit.
Okay, so still no questions come through. Do you want to leave us with any closing comments, Grant, or a top tip, or?
Yeah, I'd just say if there is anyone that's not quite sure of their next steps or wants to find out more information around safety culture and measuring it and monitoring it, please do feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'll be more than happy to put some time in and we can talk through it and determine the best solution for your business.
Great, thank you, Grant. It was a really excellent presentation, just really interesting. So that's probably why we haven't got any questions, because it was so comprehensive. So I'd like to thank you for giving up your valuable time today to do this presentation for the India branch. I'd like to thank Mohit for organising it, and I'd like to wish everyone a good afternoon or a good evening, wherever you are in the world, and we hope to see you at the next IIRSM webinar. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Happy New Year in advance to everyone.
Bye.